can stand like this, like George Bailey, or you can stand like this, like shift under pull. But at the time when the ball is coming out of the baller's hand, it's important to be able to access the ball, be in a relatively side-on position to be able to stay square on and access the ball, and be in a position where you can actually meet the ball and give it the full face of the bat. Try and focus on aligning to mid-on a little bit more, keeping my weight on my heels, and then I know that I'm going that way. If the ball starts to swing back in, I know that my head's still here and I'm still this side of it. If it does swing, then I'm balanced in here. It doesn't really matter where you start as long as when the ball's coming down, then it comes from somewhere in the region of off stump through to first slip. When it comes to playing against spin, I think feet become a lot more important, and it becomes really important to be proactive and decisive in either moving forward or moving back.
Cricket Life Stories with me, Neel Khagram. Today we're joined by Hassan Azad. Hassan, how's it all going?
It's going really well, thank you.
Hassan, you're going to give us a bit of a technical coaching session. Before we get into it, we're at this great facility here at the City Cricket Academy. Shout out to them as well first.
Yes, definitely. I just wanted to say thank you to Don Bhai at City Cricket Academy obviously, for letting us use the facilities. I left Leicestershire earlier this year, so the help that they've given me is outstanding to be able to come and use the facilities and have the coaches throw balls at me. As someone who's now looking for another county, it's really important to be able to work on my skills, and the help that they've given me has been so good in keeping my skills sharp. So massive thank you to them.
Yeah, big shout out to them. So yeah, on the subject of batting mindset, a lot of people talk about technique, but as a commentator says, 90% of it in the head?
Definitely. I think it's so important to get into the battle with the bowler. Ultimately, you can work on your technical stuff and you can work hard in the nets. You can hit as many balls as you like, but if you get into a game and you're thinking about where your hands are, where your feet are, or where your bat's coming from, you can't really compete. And ultimately, cricket's about a game played batsman versus bowler. So the key thing is to always get into that battle, try and work out what the bowler's plans are, how is he trying to get you out, and if the bowler's plans mean that you have to adapt your technique, then so be it. Nothing's set in stone. Ultimately, you're trying to win the game, and as long as you're doing that, then fair play.
Is it all about trusting the process as opposed to looking at individual scores, individual runs per innings?
Yeah, I think cricket's a game played across a season rather than across an innings or a couple of games. So you got to trust in your technique and know that statistically the work that you've done will pay you off across a season. So a lot of the times, as a batsman, I've done it myself. You work hard all winter, get your technique in good order, and then you play a couple of games where you might get a good delivery or you might make a bad decision, and you suddenly start to doubt your technique, and then you make a change, and that sets everything off. It's like dominoes. You know, you make a little change at the wrong time, and suddenly you're not thinking about the bowler and the ball and how he's trying to get you out. You're thinking about something else. You're thinking about, that technical change you've made. And before you know it, half the season's gone and you end up right back where you started. So play the game. The technical side is all well and good, but ultimately you got to back your ability and you got to try and win the game for your team and play the situation.
Perfect, Hassan. Can't wait to get into this batting masterclass. Let's go.
So for me, as an opening batsman, I'm most likely going to be facing seamers trying to swing the ball back into me primarily. So for me as a left-hander, and for anyone really, the most important thing is having access to the ball. Now that doesn't mean where you stand necessarily. I think everyone has a different setup, but what's important is where you end up at point of delivery. So as far as I'm concerned, you can stand like this, like George Bailey, or you can stand like this, like shift under pull. But at the time when the ball is coming out of the bowler's hand, it's important to be able to access the ball, be in a relatively side-on position to be able to stay square on and access the ball, and be in a position where you can actually meet the ball and give it the full face of the bat. So I try and keep things relatively simple and stand in the position that I want to be at the point of delivery. A nice high backlift. We'll come back to that later in my reasonings for that. And then I have a little trigger which really aims to just put me back in the same position. I don't want to be moving across and opening up, or I don't want to change the alignment too much in my trigger. So that's why I keep it relatively how I want it to be, and then keep my hips and my chest pretty much the same as I would in my stance, but just get a little bit of movement to be able to go back into the ball at point of delivery. In terms of guards, as I spoke about earlier, setting up for someone bowling right arm over, trying to swing it back into me, it kind of depends on what the bowler is trying to do. If it's swinging quite a lot, then I'll come across a little bit more. I think it's different for everyone. For me, it works better because coming across a little bit more and standing on middle, triggering across to middle and off, front foot on middle, means that I know that my back foot is on sort of covering off, and that anything outside my eye line I can leave. And I know that I'm looking to hit through mid-on, through to straightish mid-wicket, and that will cover me. I'm not really looking to drive through the offside for someone who's trying to swing it back into me and is swinging big. If, for instance, it starts to swing a little bit less, and I know that the offside becomes a little bit more of an option, and I know that it's not really going to hoop back and hit my off stump as I'm trying to leave it, I'll come back a little bit more, stand on middle and leg, and my trigger hopefully will take me to middle and off, just a back toe covering middle and off, and then I can play slightly straighter, more through mid off, and if the bowler loses his action, throws it out wide, I know that I can actually, if it's full enough, access the covers a bit more as well. And also it brings one of my strengths into play, which is like back foot through the offside, whereas if it's swinging in big from off stump, then I'd be putting that away and I wouldn't be looking to play through the offside at all. One of the most common dismissals, especially for left-handers, but I think it's relevant for pretty much everyone, especially when it's swinging and seaming, is leg before wicket. And more often than not, that's because of balance, which is related to head position. They both sort of go together. For me, the biggest revelation was changing my mindset in terms of not thinking about going towards the ball, but keeping my weight on my heels a little bit more as a left-hander, because I've got the ball coming back into me quite a lot. It really helped me to think about keeping everything together, keeping my weight on my heels, which means that I'm pushing off my foot and going back down the pitch. And I know that, because I know that I'm standing quite a long way across anyway, I know that I'm covering off stump, I don't need to go further that side, because as soon as the ball swings back in, I'm going that way to meet it, and it's coming the other way. So you end up playing across yourself, hit in front of all three, heads this side of your bat, and suddenly you're walking back. So it helped me a lot to just instead try and focus on aligning to mid-on a little bit more, keeping my weight on my heels, and then I know that I'm going that way. If the ball starts to swing back in, I know that my head's still here, and I'm still this side of it. If it does swing, then I'm balanced in here. And if it doesn't swing, then I know that I can, if it's really wide, I can leave it. And if it's a little bit closer, and if it's full enough, I know that with my head this side of me, I can still let my hands go and either open my wrists to get it through square on the offside, or just let my hands go through the ball and hit back straighter. It's a little bit more trust. It's a little bit more about letting your hands do the work, but I trust that this will give me a better knowledge of where my off stump is, and I know that I'll be less vulnerable to getting out leg before wicket going across my stumps. When it comes to batting and going up through the age groups, I'd always been told that your top hand should control. Your top hand should be in control, your top hand should be dominant, and your bottom hand should just be guiding it. But for me, what really struck a chord was when one of my coaches in junior cricket, Paul Johnson, told me that it doesn't really matter which hand is controlling. Ideally, both your hands should be working together. But what's important is that you're giving the ball the full face of the bat, making contact and having the widest area available. And then if you're doing that, it doesn't really matter which hand's in control because the ball's going where you want it to go and it has full access to the face of the bat. So you can, if you look at international cricket now, you see Steve Smith, who holds the bat like that. Virat Kohli holds the bat like that, very bottom hand dominant. They still have their top hands there, but their bottom hand, even though it's dominant, still gets the ball into the direction that they want it to go. So even though they're hitting through the offside, their bottom hand goes all the way around and they actually give it the full face and hit through the line of the ball. And then you have, your traditional players. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but Joe Root, for example, would be a good one because he's very orthodox. He'll be right there. He'll have his high front elbow, and he'll still hit the same area. He'll still hit the same shot. Ultimately, it's not about which hand is in control. It's about giving it the full face and being in control and hitting the ball where you want it to go. When it comes to backlift, again, similar to stance and setup that we spoke about earlier, I don't think it's particularly important where you start with, as long as when the ball is released, it comes back down from the right angle. And even with that, people will have their different ways of doing that. Some will start off here, Steve Smith will start off here and come back round. Hashim Amla was like there. Started from gully, but when it actually came down to it, it came back round. I think that's the important thing. It doesn't matter, you don't have to stand like this, or stand like that, stick hook in here, or it doesn't really matter where you start as long as when the ball's coming down, then it comes from somewhere in the region of off stump through to first slip. And the reason for that is because that backlift gives you access to the ball on top of off, that you can give it the full face. And then if it's slightly further this way, more towards your legs, then you can still have access. Ultimately with backlift, that's what it comes down to. About how high your bat should be, I think you would have seen players from around the world going from Kane Williamson, who starts with it quite low, Virat Kohli, who comes from way up high here. Ultimately, it comes down to preference and what feels comfortable, but you can weigh up the options and weigh up the strengths and weaknesses of each different backlift style. For me personally, I like to have my bat facing my bat face facing to a sort of point or just behind point, because I think it allows me to have my hands where I want them, which is right behind the bat. Again, that's a preference like we spoke about earlier, but I think for me, having my backlift coming from there allows me to have my hands in a comfortable position. The height also for me, I like to have a relatively high backlift, although watching my footage back, as anyone does really, I discovered that even though my hands start up here, when the ball is running in at the point of delivery, they're back down a little bit, and that's completely fine as well. I think for me, it's important to have them slightly further back because I think it makes me play the ball later. Whereas when I was younger, and I used to have my bat here and out in front like this, to have that really strong front shoulder, it meant that it didn't quite give me the balance. So I was out here reaching for the ball because my hands didn't really have a chance to go back. But it works differently for everyone. Like I said before, it's all about where your hands are at the point of release and how much rhythm you feel you have in your batting. When you're not quite in nick and you are getting out in ways that you don't want to, or the ball is going not quite where you want it to go, sometimes the backlift is where things creep in. For me, the biggest one that tends to happen is when someone's not a nick and trying to go at the ball too hard, your hands go out that way. And if your hands do that, it does two things. It drags your head that way, and suddenly your balance is all out, and you end up going across your stumps and getting out LBW. Or the bat comes across the line of the ball like this, and you end up either nicking off or missing the ball again, swinging in. So one of my checkpoints is, with my backlift, is just making sure that when it ultimately comes down to it, your bat is still nice and close to your body and coming from in here rather than out here away from your body. So playing against spin, I've had a little bit of a strange relationship with playing against spin because I grew up in Pakistan, and coming to the UK as a 15-year-old, my mindset against spin was to just take it on. And it didn't quite work because I think there are certain things that are very different here. Over here, spin is used more as a defensive option. And a lot of the time, because of pitches, particularly as you go up through the levels in better second 11 grounds and first class cricket, it starts to spin less and less. So it becomes more about playing for the ball that doesn't spin than to actually play against the ball that's dragging. So you've almost got to have two completely different sets of technique for playing for example, a skiddy pitch in April that's going on with the arm compared to in September when the grounds have dried out and it's starting to actually turn. The most important thing that translates well across any type of surface, any type of bowler, for me is feet. And we talk a lot about seamers and how when you're facing pace, feet movement isn't as important as being in the right position and having your weight going in the right direction. When it comes to playing against spin, I think feet become a lot more important, and it becomes really important to be proactive and decisive in either moving forward or moving back. So my setup is relatively similar, but again, I'm not thinking too much about having a high backlift. My hands are nice and neutral, nice and low. I have a little bit more of a press because I want to make sure that I don't get stuck in here. Because as soon as you get stuck in here, if the ball's skidding on with the arm, nowhere to go, hit in front of the wickets. Against an off spinner, that's so common to see, like left-handers get out LBW to off spinners against balls that don't spin. So I'll stand on a middle and leg, try and keep my front foot relatively out of the way, have a decent stride in for my press, but then again, not so much that you get stuck there, you should be able to go again. And then I'm playing in here for the ball against an off spinner. I'm looking to hit mid-off through to extra cover, but I'm playing almost in to out, making sure that my bat is in front. When it comes to a left arm spinner, again, say the ball's not spinning as much, I'll stand on probably middle, come across to off. I'm slightly more open. I know that if the ball's not spinning that much, I can just leave anything outside off. If it gets too full, I can drive it, but don't want to be too cute in the areas that I'm driving. I still want to give it the full face, maybe hit through extra cover rather than the big gap through the offside that's normally there. So earlier we spoke about playing against an off spinner when it's not spinning as much and when he's trying to skid the ball on, try and hit you on the pad to get you out LBW. Now I want to speak a little bit more about when the ball starts to actually turn a little bit more and you have both edges in play. So if the ball spins, you have the outside edge in play, and if it doesn't, you have your pad in play. I think when that starts to happen, the key thing that becomes really important is, again, footwork. So trying to get out as far as possible. But the other thing that becomes really important is having your bat out in front, because you don't want to be in a situation where if you're closed off in here, then if the ball doesn't spin, you have short leg in play. You want to meet it nice and you want to meet it out front so that your bat is covering your pad, and so that if the ball does spin, if it spins big, it'll beat you on the outside, and you don't really mind that because, as long as you're not going at it and it's not taking your edge, you're still there, you're still in control. And if it doesn't, then you meet it with the full face of your bat, or you get an inside edge, goes through to square leg, and you get off strike. When it comes to those sorts of situations, though, the worst thing you can do is just hang around waiting for a ball that's going to get you out. And then that's when it becomes really important to know what your options are. The other thing that becomes really important is, I think when it starts to spin a little bit more, it becomes more about hitting square with the spin and with your cross-batted shots, rather than trying to force the ball straight, almost going against the spin. In modern day cricket, playing against spin, it's no longer, even in 4-day cricket, it's not really just about trying to survive. I think scoring runs is really important. When it comes to 1-day cricket in particular, I think people, you have to have an option, and whether that's to get off strike or whether that's to score a boundary. And for me, that tends to be the sweep. For you, it might be different. It might be going over the top. It might be stock sweeping. It might be reverse sweeping. But as long as you have something and you've practiced it enough, I think that's fine. So when it comes to playing the sweep shot, I'll just talk about, I won't go into too much detail, I'll just talk about a couple of things that I find really help me. And for me, the most important thing is making sure that I'm not getting too far ahead, because if I go too far ahead, then my head's back, and then my foot gets in the way of my bat, and then playing across the line. For me, it's really important to line up with my head, have access to the ball, and be in a position where I can get my hands out to the ball and give it the full face of the bat. And then if you can get into that position, and then you can either go fine by just bringing your bat out like that, or you can hit almost 360. When it gets to, when you get a little bit further on, you want to reverse sweep, you can do it from the same position as well. So we've talked a little bit about like the basic technical stuff. We've talked about setup, backlift. We've talked about some of the tips and tricks to problem solve in terms of techniques. But I wanted to talk to you guys about how to actually play the game. And for me, your setup is a good starting point, but you've got to be dynamic in terms of how you're going against that bowler. You've got to think about how he's trying to get you out, and then it's really important to back yourself to make changes within the game to know how you're going to compete with the problem. And that could be a mental change, or it could be a technical change. That could be a change to try and put the bowler off. For example, you would have seen a lot of international players will come down the track of the bowler to try and put him off his length. Kevin Peterson talks about targeting a team's best bowler, hitting Dale Steyn back down the ground over his head to send a message, and that's how he plays the game. For me personally, I have a few little things that I just do normally. So for example, as soon as a bowler would go around the wicket, I know that I come across from standing on middle and leg to standing on middle, and then I trigger across to off, and then I know that I have access to the ball going through here, and he's not going to get me with one that swings back late, and I know that I'm still covering my off stump because I've come across. Or I know that if the keeper comes up and it's nibbling around, not that much space to work with, I know that if I want to put the bowler off his length, then even with the keeper up, I might come down the track and knock him down. And that's just taking calculated risks, because in the long term, you trust that it will pay off. So it's really important not to get too stuck in the technical side of things. Your technique is there, but really it's just a starting point. If you know that the bowler can't swing the ball back in, and he's only swinging away from you, and you know that you can cheat it a little bit. You can, rather than standing with a really open stance, set up for the ball coming back in, you close yourself off a bit, and you know that you won't get squared up as much, and you'll keep your position much better, and you can stay this side. As soon as he loses his line, you get him away through backward point. But the danger in cricket, because it's such a mental sport, is getting too lost in the weeds of technique and forgetting about what the actual game is, hitting the ball with the bat, trying to score runs.